Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile. One of these weeks where miraculously everybody looks the same. So yeah, if you want to see what we're drinking, if you want to see what Nish is up to, please watch the last video. And you know what? If you didn't watch last week's video, shame on you. You should have watched it anyway. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Prateek, in the last video, we talked about the acronym INVEST. A lot of people are familiar with the INVEST acronym when it comes to how to define user stories or PBIs or whatever you might call them. But I also hinted at we prefer an acronym called FIRST. And that's what this episode is going to be about. So maybe a quick review of INVEST, and then we can talk about how you get from INVEST to FIRST. So
INVEST is I'll just go through the letters and what they mean. The I in INVEST is for independent, N is negotiable, V is valuable, E is estimatable.
Yeah. Some people say estimable, but is it really worthy of respect?
It's interesting. I think when I looked it up at some point, estimable can be used as estimatable. It actually is interesting. But regardless, estimable or estimatable, whatever works for you. S is small and T is testable. That's INVEST. That is the acronym INVEST. Pretty common acronym used. I don't even know where it originated, but it's most product owners and business analysts actually learn this as a way to slice work.
Right. So if I can jump in, long time viewers of Drunk Agile probably know that Prateek and I have problems with at least two of those terms. Maybe pause your video right now and see if you can guess what those two terms are. But I'm going to jump out, and you can maybe throw in more than these two or whatever. But I'm going to jump in and say the valuable and estimatable. We're going to make up a word too, so it's okay to make up a word for INVEST. Valuable and estimatable are the ones that give us heartburn. Can you say a little bit about that?
Let's start with estimatable. That's the easier one. Again, if you click on any random episode for Drunk Agile, you will probably find out why we don't like estimatable. It's because we don't necessarily like estimation too much. We don't want to waste people's time figuring out whether this is a 2 or a 3, or whether this is a 5 or a 3, and why am I not allowed to use 4, things like that. We don't want people wasting time on that. We would rather people do what we call right sizing. That's what we would rather have people do. So that's why we have a problem with the estimatable part of INVEST. The other one's valuable. Why do we have a problem with valuable, Dan?
Well, so I just want to say one very quick thing about estimatable. It's maybe to the uninitiated, estimatable and right-sized might sound like the same thing. And the thing is, what we're really saying is it's almost impossible to get an accurate estimate up front, right? Which is why, I don't know, we have thousands of videos on right sizing, right?
Yeah.
Which is why we talk about right sizing. Right sizing is not just a one-time activity; it's kind of a continual activity as you're working on. So right sizing, and maybe think about what letter right sizing starts with. The same thing can be said of valuable, right? That we believe it is impossible. It's impossible to know what the value of something is upfront. So many Agile frameworks will tell you can know that. So many product managers out there are probably screaming at us right now saying you can know that. I'm telling you, you can't. You think you do, but you can't. And so much of how Prateek and I talk about Agile is, I'm going to steal Prateek's thunder here, is talking about Agile is all about figuring out how wrong you are as quickly as possible. The assumption has to be that you're wrong, not right. So when it comes to value, if you assume that you're wrong, then the value that this thing isn't important. What's really important is something we mentioned in the last video, is how quickly can I get feedback on this thing to know, if it's valuable or not. Because only when I get it in the hands of my customer can I make that assessment. So it doesn't matter if I think it's valuable while it's sitting in a backlog somewhere. Once I put it in the hands of the person who's actually supposed to use it, do they find it valuable? How do I get that feedback? And think about what letter feedback starts with. I don't know. Do you want to say some more about that, Pete?
No, it's one of our favorite things to say, and I don't know how often Dan says it, but say this all the time, is we want to be approximately right rather than precisely wrong, and that applies to both estimatable and valuable. We want to work on things that we think might be valuable rather than things that we think might not be valuable. But we don't need to kind of judge things by value, and same thing with estimation. We don't need to be precise about it. As long as it's in the right range, we're fine. Let's move on.
Right. So let's so the one that's kind of interesting is the negotiable piece. Why? I don't want to say that I didn't want to come out and say we have a problem with negotiable, because I think negotiable is kind of the right way to be thinking about it. But why is there's no N in first? So why are we dropping the term negotiable?
I just don't think it's the most important thing to worry about when you're slicing stuff. My guess is if you are running a whip limited system, that negotiation is by default going to happen when you decide to pull something in. What we're going to pull in is going to by default happen. When it comes to slicing stories, splitting stories, I don't necessarily think negotiable is that big a thing to worry about.
Well, and I think the negotiation is covered by right sizing too. I mean, by definition, if we're going to right sizing, you have to. I mean, you just have to negotiate. Like, what does the acceptance criteria? Well, how many acceptance criteria?
How many?
There?
Yeah.
What does that acceptance criteria look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Yeah. So it's kind of covered under that umbrella of right sizing, which brings us to first. Now, what's interesting is if you leave negotiable in there and you change valuable to feedbackable, then you have infest. And maybe you want to infest your process with this stuff. Maybe you do, but that probably doesn't play, which is why we have to go further. We have to change E to right sizing, whatever. Rearrange some words, and we come up with first. So Prateek, drum roll, please. What does first stand for?
Yeah, so first, at least the way we like to talk about slicing, that's first. And shout out and credit to Becky McNeely, who was a part of figuring this out, figuring out what we should call this thing.
Thank you, Becky.
Yeah, it's first. F is feedbackable. That is probably the most important F word in Agile.
Next to flow.
With flow, fighting with flow, but it's flow. The reason you do flow is to get feedback.
Right.
So F is feedbackable. I is still independent. We want these things to be as independent as possible of each other so that we can pull them in different order if we need to. R is right sized. Talked a whole bunch about right size already, also in previous episodes. S and T are the same as invest, as small as possible, and T, testable, which I do feel, along with feedbackable, is probably one of the most important characteristics for a story. If you can't test it, how do you know you actually did something?
Right.
So first is those five things. Yeah,
I can't cut either. Now, if you're paying attention, you might think that, hey, right sizing and small, those kind of sound similar. Those kind of sound redundant. If I can jump in, I'll just say, a lot of people think right sizing just as, well, hey, let's just get it under our SLE. Let's get it as, just so it's right under our SLE. And hopefully you know what I'm talking about when I say that. And the idea of right sizing is, it's not that it's just under its SLE, it's as small as possible, so that it's still independent, so that it's still testable, so that it's still feedable. It's as small as possible and under the SLE. So that's why I think those two things are still still important to stress that, hey, we just because our SLE is 14 days doesn't, at the 85th percentile, 14 days or less at 85th percentile, doesn't mean we want all of our items to be exactly 14 days. That's not what we're saying at all. Were you gonna jump in and say something?
Well, yeah, and the other thing of this is what your and again, Dan used the SLE word. If you know what that means, your current SLE might just be way outsized for where you want your process to be. So things could be right sized, but still not small enough for where you aim to get to. So keeping them as small as possible is going to keep lowering that SLE, where right sizing and small start to become very similar to each other later on.
Right. So to kind of get us down the road to wrapping up. First and foremost, I want to say I don't think either one of us have really a ton of heartburn with Invest itself. In fact, I think it's a great mental model to start with. I mean, if you're already thinking about the world in terms of Invest, I think you're probably better off than most teams, at least that we've seen. It's just that we think, unfortunately, Invest perpetuates a couple of myths of Agile that we think need to be undone. And that's why that flip to first, for us anyway, is so important. Get out of this idea that you can know value up front. Get out of this idea that you have to estimate everything up front. Though to me, those are just really not Agile concepts. And they don't serve you well. And you'll be much better off thinking about in terms of how quickly can I get feedback? Is the thing right sized? Is it as small as possible? Those types of things.
Yeah, and to further that, even again, if you're using Invest right now, once you have created something that's Invest compliant, it's halfway through your system, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. There is absolutely no reason why you should not split it then as well. And that's why I feel like first kind of leads you down that path a little faster than Invest does. When you focus on feedback and don't worry about what we thought was the value of this thing up front, what we thought was the estimate of this thing up front, it just frees you up a little more to break items that are in flight a little more than Invest would. But you could potentially apply Invest even in something that's in flight. It's just the default is not to.
Don't you hate when bad things happen to good sentences, right?
Yeah, I know. Don't you hate when good whiskey happen to good sentences?
To be having them to be able.
Whiskey.
Well, so there you have it. As eloquent as always, Prateek with the last word. I'm just going to wrap us up now.
It's only going downhill from here.
I was going to say, there are three signals that we need to wrap up an episode. One, Prateek starts to ramble, because he's usually our 2 minutes and 18 seconds man. So Prateek starts to ramble. Number two, I'm out of whiskey. I don't know about you, but I'm
almost out. Yeah.
Number three, Nisha's halfway out for pillow. So so we know we need to be done. For Nisha, for Prateek, my name is Andrew Vacanti. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching, everyone.